Hello, I'm Luke, the Crazy Maker Nerd. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe and bell icon below. Today, we're going to paint Temu miniatures, which are surprisingly good. I was scrolling through Temu, as one does, and I kept coming across these incredibly cheap, full metal miniatures. It's a little bit suspicious. Let's just say they piqued my curiosity. The pictures looked incredibly detailed and the miniatures looked pretty good. Now I have to admit I wouldn't normally buy many things from Temu because of their ethics and all of that stuff, but if you're on a budget it might actually be an option, so I thought I'd investigate. So I ordered them and some time passed.
One eternity later.
And then they arrived and they look like this. I thought they'd be the cheapest thing imaginable, very lightweight, very warped, probably damaged from packaging, but in fact they were immaculate, very well cast, with incredibly crisp detail. Not what I was expecting when I started this investigation, and overall they were seriously good for the price I paid. I think I paid somewhere around £3.50. That's incredibly cheap for a very detailed miniature. And of course I was a little bit suspicious when they first turned up because I thought, oh, is this a recast of somebody else's work? So I did the best of my ability to check, and it seems that they're not. If you take a screenshot of the listing and then you put it through Google Lens, the only thing that comes up is resellers selling the same thing for a bit more. It comes up with AliExpress and it comes up with Temu. So I guess somebody overseas is making these miniatures out of metal from an original sculpt, which is, who knows, it's all kind of lost in translation and various websites. The one minor negative, however, is there seems to be two types of scale here. There seems to be a 25mm scale and there seems to be a 32mm heroic scale, more comparable to a Warhammer figure. So with the initial shock worn off, the big question is, how well can I paint these up? Now there's two things here. There's the quality of the miniature, and then there's my painting abilities. I am not the greatest painter in the world, but I will show you the steps for two of these miniatures. The skeleton with the sword, and the Kenku Wizard folklore person. So let's get started. First things first, let's stick these minis down to the spray stick using some blue tack, and just like that they are primed in black. Unfortunately the only coloured spray paint I have at the moment. Now transferring the blue tack and the miniatures to the painting handles that I'll be using for today. They don't have to be painting handles, they could be a piece of cork or a wine stopper, but I've got two painting handles so I figured I'd use them. Using Necromancer Cloak and Ash Grey, I dry brushed all over the feet, the hands, the beak, and where any feathers would be showing. This is to try and emulate the look of a large crow. For the cloak, I've gone with a red palette. We're going to start with Screamer Pink and cover the entire cloak. Now we're going to use leather brown, and I'm just going to go and pick out all of those bits of belt. And the buttons on the cloak. The pouches on the belt. And the cuffs around the cloak. Trying very carefully to not get it on that bright red. Now we're going to move on to the staff using Monster Brown. We've chosen this to try and make it look like an ash staff to add a bit more variety to those shades of brown that we're using today. I find this is quite a thin paint, so I go over it a couple of times just to make sure I get a good coverage. Next up, skeleton bone. We're going to use this to paint the skulls on the shoulder of the cloak. Then I noticed the plate mail underneath, so we're going to flip over to tainted gold quickly and just pull out the plate mail on the shoulder. With that done and dusted, we're going to flip back to skeleton bone and finish off all of the skulls on the shoulder. Now I'm going to mix together the skeleton bone and some of the red to try and get this pinky colour. This is going to be used to pull out all those ropes. I don't want to do them in a normal rope colour, I want to try and keep it within the red palette of the piece that I'm doing at the moment, just so that they don't stand out too much. Now we're going to get the tainted gold back out and go over all over the buttons on all the belts, all of the cuffs, anything that we can find. Now we're going to use night scales to focus on the top of the staff, specifically the stone inside the twigs. It definitely gives that dark magician vibe. That's all the base coats completed, so now we're going to move on to dark tone wash. This is going to be slathered all over the cloak and the pouches and all of the belt and the staff, but we're going to leave out all of the bits where the crow is pushing through. We're then going to use contrast skeleton horde all over the skulls on the shoulders to bring out all of those juicy details. Whoops, I missed this cuff. Gunmetal it is. Once it's dry, we're going to get all the base coats out. Firstly, Screamer Pink, and we're going to do some scattered, scratchy edges and highlights all over the cloak. We're doing this to pull out all of the high points and to make them look a little bit more 3D. Similarly, we're going to use skeleton bone and put out all of the edge highlights on the skulls. Back to tainted gold again, I'm going to put out all of the high points on the plate mail of the shoulder. And the same again with night scales for the rock in the staff. Now mixing matte white and leather brown together, I'm going to make a lighter tone to go over all of the leather pieces, which I'll scratch in between the buttons and on any of the edges I feel appropriate. Now for monster brown to put out all the twisted twig sections on the staff. And now for the final stage, let's pop him off this painting handle and then blue tack him to a pot, which is smaller diameter than the base. The colour we're going to use is Terra from Vallejo. I'm also going to put a thin coat of this over the top of the base, because this will act like mud after we've put the flocking on. I have to repeat this at least 2 times because I've intentionally thinned the paint so that the paint on top of the base looks uneven. This is to help emulate that mud effect I want to appear underneath the flocking I'm going to use. Now I pop the miniature onto a tray and I use basing glue all over the top face of the base. Firstly, I sprinkle on a longer grass. Then I use my Hornby grass applicator with a finer grass inside it. Lastly, I brush off any grass that's stuck to the feet or that's on the model itself. And that's the Kenku Wizard complete to what I would call battle ready, not display ready. But for D&D, that's what I normally do. Now we're going to start the skeleton, covering most of the model in skeleton bone. Now ideally I would have had to spray paint this colour, but the only spray paint I had was black, and I find that the sprays actually cling better to metal models. So 2 coats it is. I'm going to use oak brown to, you guessed it, paint the oak shield. We're going to cover both the front and the back face. And we're also going to use a little bit on the handle of the sword. Next up, we're going to use gunmetal to coat the entire blade of the sword, the pommel of the sword, and then I'm going to paint the edge of the shield on both the front, side and back. Now using tainted gold, I'm just going to pull out those little gems on the sword. We're also going to use leather brown just to cover the strap on the inside of the shield. As well as add a little bit of detail to the handle of the sword. Now I'm going to use astrogranite and astrogranite debris for the base of the miniature. Now I know that I recently did a video on using sand instead, but because all of my skeletons in my undead army originally used astrogranite, I figured I should probably use some of these up. Once all that is dry, it's time to move on to the washes. Firstly, we're going to use contrast skeleton horde all over the bones of the skeleton, just to pull out all of these details and give it a bit more of a yellowy look. Next up is everyone's favourite, dark tone. We're going to cover all the astrogranite on the base, the sword and the shield to try and pull out some details. Now we're going to let all those dry and then we're going to start using the base colours again. Firstly, skeleton bone. I'm going to pull out all of the highest points of the skeleton using this colour, which includes using some wet blending on the head to try and smooth out the cranium, and pulling out really sharp points such as the cheekbones and the jawline. I also attempted to add some further detail by making some little toe blobs on the feet. On the ankles, I highlighted the highest points, and the same on the ribcage at the back and on the shoulder blades. Next up, I used ash grey to dry brush the entire base. I also used gunmetal on the absolute edges of the sword. And I also did a scratchy effect on the side to make it glint that little bit more. Now using leather brown, I painted on a wood streaking effect from top to bottom of the shield. I did this on the front face and on the back face. Now I pulled out a new paint, Retributor Armour. This was to highlight all of the single bolts and rivets all over the shield. I also used a little bit to add a little bit more texture and detail to the guard of the sword. And now, repeating the final step of the last model, I stick the model down to a smaller pot of paint just so I can get all the way around the rim, and then I paint the rim in Terra. And that's it, one grisly looking Temu skeleton, painted in my Undead Armies palette. So there we go, from cheap Temu miniatures to usable Dungeons & Dragons and Warhammer Fantasy pieces. Now, I'm still surprised by the qualities, and I think I'm going to do a video with the other two miniatures at some point, and maybe buy a few more of the skeletons that I saw in the 25mm range. Overall, if you're just getting into Dungeons & Dragons or just getting into wargaming and you want a cheaper alternative to the, let's say, bigger companies that are a bit more expensive, then I don't see why not. Let me know if you've ever bought miniatures from Temu yourself. Post in the comments below. Is there any models that you think I should be getting to paint for a future video? Anything you would recommend? Don't forget to hit that like button to help support the channel, and hit the subscribe and bell icon so you know when the next video will be up. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. See you later, my nerds. Why are you still here? Go paint some stuff.